I used to believe that love could survive anything if you just worked hard enough at it. I used to think that loyalty was a currency that held real value in this world, that if you gave everything you had to someone, they would protect that gift like it was sacred. I was 23 when I met Ryan Miller at a networking event in downtown Seattle, back when I still had that bright-eyed optimism that makes you believe every handshake could change your life. He was 28, confident in that effortless way that comes from never having been told no. And when he smiled at me across the room at that overpriced cocktail bar near Pike Place Market, I felt something shift in my chest like the first crack in ice before spring. We talked for 3 hours that night about business ideas and dreams and all the things we wanted to build. And by the time we left, the city lights reflecting off the Puget Sound seemed to glow just a little brighter. He told me I was brilliant, that my mind worked differently than anyone he had ever met. And God help me, I believed him because I wanted to believe that someone finally saw me for who I really was. We got married 18 months later in a small ceremony at a bed and breakfast in the San Juan Islands. Just family and close friends. Nothing fancy because we were saving every dollar to launch what we called our dream. Ryan had been working at a tech startup that went nowhere, and I had been grinding through 60-hour weeks at a marketing agency in Belltown. But together we had this vision for a digital consulting firm that would help small businesses build their online presence from the ground up. I came up with the name Horizon Digital Solutions because I liked the idea that we were always looking forward, always chasing the next sunrise. I designed the logo on my laptop at 2 a.m. while Ryan slept, sketching out concepts until my eyes burned and my coffee went cold. I wrote the business plan, all 47 pages of it, mapping out our services and pricing structures and target demographics with the kind of obsessive detail that my college professors used to say would either make me successful or drive me insane. Ryan read it once, nodded, told me it was perfect, and then we filed the LLC paperwork with him listed as the sole owner because he said it would be cleaner for tax purposes, and I trusted him completely because that is what you do when you love someone. You trust them with the keys to everything you have built. The first 2 years were brutal in that way that tests whether you really want something or if you are just in love with the idea of wanting it. We worked out of our tiny apartment in Capitol Hill, the one with the kitchen so small you could barely turn around without hitting the counter. And we survived on cheap takeout from the Thai place on the corner, and too much coffee from the drive-through espresso stand that knew our order by heart. I handled all the client acquisition, all the strategy development, all the content creation, while Ryan managed what he called the operations side, which mostly meant he showed up to meetings and shook hands and made people feel good about writing us checks. I did not mind at first because I told myself we were a team, that his charm brought in the clients and my work kept them coming back. And that was a fair division of labor even if I was the one staying up until 3 a.m. tweaking website designs and writing email campaigns while he scrolled through his phone on the couch. We landed our first major client in year 2, a local coffee roaster called Cascade Beans that wanted to expand their online sales, and I built them a complete digital strategy that tripled their revenue in 6 months. Ryan took the owner out for drinks to celebrate and came home smelling like bourbon and telling me how proud he was. And I remember feeling this warm glow in my chest because I thought we had finally made it, that all the sacrifice was paying off. By year 3, Horizon Digital Solutions had 15 clients and a small office space in Fremont, and I had hired 2 junior marketers to help manage the workload because I was drowning in deliverables, and Ryan kept saying we needed to scale up. He started traveling more, flying down to San Francisco and Portland for what he called business development meetings, and I stayed behind managing everything because someone had to keep the machine running. I noticed small things that did not quite add up, like how our business account always seemed lower than I expected, or how Ryan would get defensive when I asked to review our financials. But I pushed those thoughts down because questioning your husband feels like admitting your marriage might be broken, and I was not ready to face that possibility yet. Then one night in late September, I came home early from a client dinner because I had a migraine that felt like someone was driving nails through my skull, and I found Ryan on our back deck talking on his phone in that low, urgent voice people use when they do not want to be overheard. He did not see me standing in the doorway, and I heard him say her name, Jessica, the girl he had hired 6 months ago as his executive assistant, and the way he said it made my stomach drop like I was falling from a great height. I did not confront him that night because I was a coward, because some part of me thought that if I did not acknowledge what I had heard, then maybe it was not real. But I started paying attention after that in a way I had not before. The proof came in pieces over the next few weeks like a puzzle assembling itself against my will. Text messages lighting up his phone at midnight with heart emojis that he deleted before I could ask about them. Charges on our credit card for dinner at expensive restaurants in neighborhoods we never went to together. The way he started working late at the office 3 or 4 nights a week, when before he always came home by 6. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of running the business was making me see things that were not there. But then I checked our business bank statements one afternoon when Ryan was out, and I realized that he had been moving money into a personal account I did not know existed. Small transfers of $2,000 or $3,000 at a time that added up to nearly $40,000 over 6 months. When I finally confronted him on a cold November evening with rain hammering against our windows, he did not even have the decency to lie convincingly. He just looked at me with this flat expression and said he had fallen out of love, that Jessica understood him in ways I never could, and that he wanted a divorce. I asked him about the money, and he laughed, and told me I should be grateful he was letting me walk away with anything at all, considering I had contributed so little to building the business. That word, little, hit me like a physical blow, because I had given him everything, my ideas and my labor and my faith, and he was erasing all of it with a single syllable. The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by a process server to our office where all my employees could watch me sign for them, and Ryan moved out that same day without even pretending to feel bad about it. He took the good furniture and the expensive coffee maker and half the art off the walls, and when I walked through our apartment afterward, it felt like a museum of everything I had lost. His lawyer was a man named Derek Stapleton, who wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and had that particular kind of smugness that comes from winning too many times. And at our first mediation session, he made it clear that Ryan intended to keep everything, including full ownership of Horizon Digital Solutions, because his name was on all the paperwork and I was just the supportive wife who helped out sometimes. I sat there in that sterile conference room at Stapleton Legal Group in downtown Seattle, listening to them rewrite history, listening to Ryan claim he had built the company from nothing while I had mostly handled administrative tasks. And I felt something inside me crack open like a geode, revealing all the sharp edges I had been keeping hidden. Derek suggested I accept a settlement of $20,000 and walk away quietly, and Ryan nodded along like he was doing me a favor, and I realized in that moment that they actually believed their own lies, that they had convinced themselves I was just some naive girl who got lucky marrying an ambitious man. I hired Linda Evans 3 days later after calling every family law attorney in Seattle, and finally finding someone who did not treat me like I was wasting their time. Linda was 56 with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of betrayal human beings are capable of, and when I told her my story in her office overlooking Elliott Bay, she did not offer me sympathy or platitudes. She just looked at me across her desk and asked if I was ready to fight because this was going to get ugly before it got better, and I told her I was ready even though I was not sure I believed it yet. She explained that Washington was a community property state, which meant everything acquired during the marriage should be split equally, but that we needed to prove my contributions to the business were substantial, and that Ryan had been hiding assets. She recommended a forensic accountant named Patricia Chen, who specialized in uncovering financial fraud in divorce cases, and I emptied my savings account to pay her retainer because what else was I going to do with that money, save it for a future that already felt impossible? My parents called me from their retirement home in Spokane and told me to just take the settlement and move on because fighting would only make things worse. And I realized they did not understand that this was not about the money anymore. It was about refusing to let someone erase me from my own story. The next 2 months were the loneliest of my life as I watched Ryan and Jessica post photos on social media of them at Canlis and taking weekend trips to Vancouver Island while I worked with Patricia, going through 5 years of business records, trying to piece together the truth. We pulled bank statements and tax returns and client contracts and email threads, and slowly a pattern emerged that made my hands shake when I finally saw it laid out in spreadsheets and charts. Every major client we had ever landed had come through my network or my outreach. Every successful campaign had been built on strategies I had developed and implemented. Every invoice showed my name in the project management notes and my signature on the creative briefs. Ryan had essentially been a figurehead who showed up to collect checks for work I had done, and he had systematically transferred profits into accounts I could not access while paying himself a salary 3 times what he paid me for doing a fraction of the work. Patricia estimated that over the 5 years of our marriage, I had generated approximately $6.7 million in revenue for Horizon Digital Solutions, while Ryan had contributed maybe 15% of the actual billable work, and she said she had never seen a case of financial manipulation this blatant in her entire career. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss these powerful stories of truth and justice, and hit that notification bell so you will be the first to know when new content drops. And if this story resonates with you, Comment below with something like "Justice always finds a way," because your engagement helps these messages reach people who need to hear them most. The trial was scheduled for late January, and in the weeks leading up to it, I barely slept because I kept imagining all the ways it could go wrong. All the ways Derek Stapleton would twist the facts and make me look like a vindictive ex-wife who was just bitter about the affair. Linda coached me on courtroom demeanor, teaching me to keep my voice steady even when I wanted to scream, to maintain eye contact even when I wanted to disappear, to remember that the truth was my weapon, and I just needed to trust the process. The morning of the trial, I put on my most professional Navy suit and pulled my blonde hair back in a way that made me look older and more serious. And I walked into the King County Courthouse feeling like I was about to step onto a battlefield where the casualties would be measured in dignity rather than blood. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill and wooden benches that creaked when you shifted your weight. And when Ryan walked in with Jessica on his arm like this was some kind of social event, I felt a rage so pure it almost scared me. Derek Stapleton wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my car. And when he stood to give his opening statement, he painted a picture of Ryan as a visionary entrepreneur who had generously allowed his wife to participate in his success. And he suggested I was now trying to exploit our failed marriage for financial gain because I lacked the skills to support myself independently. Linda countered with precision and facts, walking the judge through a timeline of my education in marketing from the University of Washington, my work history before meeting Ryan, my role in founding and building Horizon Digital Solutions, and the documented evidence of my contributions versus his. She presented client testimonials praising my strategic thinking and execution, email chains showing me solving complex problems while Ryan was unreachable, and financial records proving that I had worked twice as many billable hours as him every single year we were in business together. The judge, an older woman named Margaret Thornton, who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense, listened without expression while taking notes, and I tried to read her face for any sign of what she was thinking but found nothing. Ryan testified that he had handled all the important business decisions, and I had simply been good at following his direction. And when Derek asked him to describe my role in the company, he actually used the word assistant multiple times, like I had been fetching his coffee instead of building his empire. Jessica sat in the gallery smirking like she had already won, and I wondered what it must be like to have so little self-awareness that you could sit in a courtroom watching a man destroy his wife and feel nothing but satisfaction. Then it was my turn to testify, and Linda asked me to walk through the founding of the business step by step, and I did not cry or raise my voice even though everything in me wanted to do both. I explained how I had conceived the business model and written the plan and designed the brand and landed the first clients, how I had worked 100-hour weeks for years to build something I believed in, how I had trusted Ryan with the legal and financial structure because I thought we were partners in every sense of the word. Derek tried to rattle me on cross-examination, suggesting I was exaggerating my role and diminishing Ryan's contributions. But I had Patricia's forensic report and 5 years of documentation backing up every word I said, and by the time I stepped down, I could see that his confidence had started to crack just slightly around the edges. The forensic accountant testified next, walking Judge Thornton through her analysis of the business finances with charts and graphs that made it impossible to deny the truth. And she stated clearly for the record that based on her professional assessment, Emily Carter had generated the vast majority of revenue and performed the vast majority of billable work for Horizon Digital Solutions, while Ryan Miller had systematically diverted profits into personal accounts and undercompensated his wife for her labor. The courtroom went very quiet after that testimony, and I saw Ryan lean over to whisper something urgent to Derek, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to feel the smallest flicker of hope that maybe truth actually mattered in this world after all. The lunch recess felt like it lasted an eternity as I sat in the courthouse cafeteria with Linda, neither of us eating the sandwiches we had bought from the vending machine because my stomach was twisted into knots and food seemed impossible. She told me the morning had gone better than she expected, that Patricia's testimony had been devastating to Ryan's case, but she warned me not to celebrate yet because Derek Stapleton had built his reputation on finding ways to win, even when the facts were against him. I watched other people in the cafeteria going about their normal lives, lawyers discussing baseball scores and clerks complaining about parking tickets, and I felt like I was watching them through glass, separated from ordinary existence by the weight of what I was fighting for. Linda checked her phone and told me we needed to head back upstairs because court would resume in 10 minutes. And as we walked through those sterile hallways with their scuffed linoleum floors and bulletin boards covered in legal notices, I said a prayer to whatever force governs justice in this universe that truth would be enough to save me. When we reconvened, Derek called Ryan back to the stand for redirect examination, and I could see he was trying to recover ground by having Ryan emphasize his vision and leadership and all those intangible qualities that are hard to quantify in a forensic report. Ryan talked about the risks he had taken in leaving his stable job to start the business, the stress he had endured managing client relationships, the strategic decisions that had positioned Horizon Digital Solutions for growth, and he spoke with such conviction that I almost wondered if he actually believed his own revisionist history. Derek asked him directly whether he believed Emily had been an equal partner in building the company, and Ryan paused for dramatic effect before saying that while I had been helpful in certain tactical areas, the overall success of the business was attributable to his vision and his willingness to take the financial risks necessary for growth. I wanted to stand up and scream that there had been no financial risks because we had bootstrapped everything with my credit cards and my student loan refunds, that every dollar we invested had come from my pockets while he was still making car payments on a BMW he could not afford. But Linda put her hand on my arm in a way that told me to stay silent and let the evidence speak for itself. Linda's cross-examination of Ryan was surgical in its precision as she walked him through specific client accounts and asked him to describe his role in each one, and he stumbled repeatedly because he could not articulate what he had actually done beyond attending kickoff meetings and signing contracts. She asked him about the business plan, and he admitted he had not written it, but insisted he had provided the strategic framework, and then she pulled out a copy of the original document with my digital signature on every page and tracked changes showing my edits and revisions spanning 3 months before we even filed the LLC paperwork. She asked him about the logo and brand identity, and he said he had approved the final designs, and she produced emails showing I had created 12 different concepts and he had replied to exactly one of them, with the words, "Looks good, go with that." She asked him about our top 5 clients by revenue, and he could not name the key stakeholders or describe the services we provided without referring to notes. And with each question, his credibility eroded a little more like a riverbank crumbling under constant pressure. By the time Linda finished with him, Ryan looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched and his confident smile replaced by something that resembled panic. And I realized that maybe he had started to understand that his lies were catching up to him in a room where lies had consequences. Derek tried to salvage his case by calling Jessica to testify as a character witness, which Linda later told me was a desperate move that suggested he knew he was losing. Jessica took the stand wearing a dress that was too formal for someone her age and too expensive for someone with her salary, and I wondered if Ryan had bought it for her with money he had stolen from our business. She testified that Ryan was brilliant and visionary, and that she had learned so much working under his leadership, and Derek asked her whether she had ever witnessed me contributing significantly to the business operations. Jessica said she had only started 6 months ago, but in that time she had mostly seen Ryan handling the important work while I seemed to focus on administrative tasks, and I felt my face flush hot with rage because she had been there for half a year and had spent most of that time having an affair with my husband in hotels I had probably paid for with my labor. Linda objected to the testimony as speculative since Jessica had no knowledge of the business history prior to her employment, and Judge Thornton sustained the objection with a look that suggested she was not impressed by this particular witness. On cross-examination, Linda asked Jessica to describe her specific job responsibilities, and it became clear that she was essentially a glorified scheduler who managed Ryan's calendar and booked his travel. And when Linda asked her whether she had any expertise in marketing or business strategy, Jessica admitted she had a degree in hospitality management and had worked at a hotel front desk before Ryan hired her. The implication hung in the air that her qualifications for the position might have had less to do with her professional skills and more to do with other factors, and I saw several people in the gallery exchange knowing looks. The afternoon dragged on with additional witnesses and exhibits, and I testified again to provide more detailed examples of my work on specific client accounts, describing campaigns I had built and problems I had solved, and relationships I had nurtured over years of patient effort. Linda walked me through a particularly successful project for a client called Evergreen Home Goods, a furniture retailer based in Tacoma that had been struggling with online sales before I redesigned their entire digital presence and increased their e-commerce revenue by 400% in 8 months. I explained the research I had done analyzing their customer demographics, the content strategy I had developed to highlight their sustainability practices, the email automation sequences I had built to recover abandoned shopping carts, and the social media campaigns I had created to drive traffic to their site. Derek tried to suggest that Ryan had supervised this work and approved all major decisions, But I had documentation showing that Ryan had been traveling during most of the project timeline and had been copied on exactly 3 emails related to it, none of which he had responded to. Judge Thornton asked me directly how many hours per week I had typically worked during our marriage, and I told her honestly that it varied but was rarely less than 60 and often exceeded 80 during busy periods, and she asked whether Ryan had worked similar hours. I paused because I did not want to seem vindictive, but Linda had coached me to answer questions directly and factually, so I said that based on his calendar and his presence in the office, I estimated he averaged maybe 35 to 40 hours per week and frequently left early or arrived late. The final testimony of the day came from 2 of our former clients who Linda had subpoenaed, and both of them confirmed that I had been their primary point of contact throughout their engagements with Horizon Digital Solutions, and that Ryan had been largely absent from the day-to-day work. One of them, a woman named Sandra Martinez who owned a chain of yoga studios called Mindful Movement across the Seattle area, said explicitly that she had hired us because of my pitch and my portfolio, and that she had been disappointed by how little she saw Ryan involved in the actual execution of her campaign. The other client, a man named Thomas Brennan, who ran a craft brewery in Ballard called Rainier Ridge Brewing, testified that I had essentially saved his business by rebuilding his entire marketing strategy after a failed product launch, and he said he had recommended Horizon Digital Solutions to at least a dozen other business owners specifically because of the quality of my work. Derek tried to impeach their testimony by suggesting they were biased in my favor, but both witnesses were firm in their recollections and had brought their own documentation, including email chains and project timelines that corroborated everything they said. By the time court adjourned for the day, I felt cautiously optimistic, but also exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, like someone had been extracting pieces of my soul for 8 hours straight. If this story is touching your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more powerful narratives about courage and truth, and make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And drop a comment saying something like, "Truth always rises to the surface," because your support means everything and helps these stories reach the people who need them most. That evening, I went back to my apartment alone, while Linda went home to her family in Queen Anne, and I sat on my couch eating leftover pad thai from the Thai place that had sustained me through so many late nights of work, and I let myself cry for the first time since the trial started. I cried for the girl I had been at 23 who believed love was enough, for the years I had lost building something with someone who never valued my contributions, for the humiliation of having my life dissected in a public courtroom, while strangers judged whether my pain was legitimate. I cried until my eyes were swollen and my chest ached, and then I washed my face and made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat looking out at the city lights, trying to imagine what my life would look like on the other side of this nightmare. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother asking how the trial was going, and I replied that it was too soon to tell, but I was holding up okay, which was only partially true. My best friend Rachel called from Portland, where she had moved for grad school, and I told her about the testimony and Patricia's forensic report, and she said she had always known Ryan was taking credit for my work, but had not wanted to say anything because she thought it might damage our marriage. I asked her why people always stay silent about truths that could save someone from disaster, and she said she was sorry and that she should have spoken up sooner, and I told her I understood because I probably would have done the same thing in her position. The second day of trial began with closing arguments, and Derek stood before Judge Thornton and made his final pitch for why Ryan deserved to keep Horizon Digital Solutions and why my contributions had been minimal at best. He argued that business ownership was about more than just labor hours, that it required vision and risk-taking and leadership qualities that could not be measured in spreadsheets, and that Ryan had demonstrated those qualities by having the courage to start the company in the first place. He suggested that my testimony was colored by bitterness over the affair and the divorce, and that I was attempting to weaponize the court system to punish my ex-husband for falling out of love with me. He painted me as a woman scorned who was trying to destroy a successful business out of spite, and he asked Judge Thornton to see through my manipulation and recognize that sometimes marriages fail, and that does not entitle one party to retroactively claim ownership of assets they did not earn. His words were smooth and practiced, and I watched him pace the courtroom like an actor on a stage, and I wondered how many times he had given this same performance in defense of men who had stolen from their wives. Linda's closing argument was different in tone and substance as she focused relentlessly on the documented facts rather than emotional appeals or character assassination. She walked Judge Thornton through the timeline of the business creation, showing my fingerprints on every foundational element, through the financial records showing the disparity between my billable hours and Ryan's, through the client testimonials confirming my role as the primary strategic and creative force behind our success. She pointed out that Washington law required equitable distribution of marital assets, and that equity demanded recognition of actual contributions rather than whose name appeared on incorporation documents filed early in a marriage when trust was still intact. She noted that Ryan had systematically concealed the true value of the business and had diverted marital assets into accounts designed to deprive me of my fair share, and she argued that such conduct warranted not just equitable distribution, but also an award of damages for financial misconduct. She concluded by saying that this case was fundamentally about whether the law would allow a woman to be erased from her own story, whether a man could steal 5 years of his wife's labor and creativity and walk away with everything simply because he had been clever enough to put his name on the paperwork, and she asked Judge Thornton to send a clear message that in Washington state, justice meant more than rewarding whoever told the most convincing lies. Judge Thornton said she would take the matter under advisement and issue a written ruling within 2 weeks, which Linda told me was standard practice in complex divorce cases, but still felt like torture because I had to go back to my life not knowing whether I would be vindicated or destroyed. I went back to work at a coffee shop in Fremont that had offered me a part-time job managing their social media, which paid barely enough to cover my rent, but at least gave me something to do besides obsess over the trial. My co-workers were mostly college kids who had no idea about my situation, and I found comfort in the mundane rhythm of making lattes and restocking pastries and writing captions for Instagram posts about seasonal drinks. At night, I would lie awake replaying moments from the trial, wondering if I had said the right things, or if Derek had planted enough doubt in Judge Thornton's mind to swing the decision in Ryan's favor, and I would check my email compulsively hoping for news from Linda, even though I knew it was too soon. The ruling came on a gray February morning when Seattle rain was falling in that persistent way that makes you forget the sun ever existed, and I was restocking napkins at the coffee shop when my phone buzzed with an email from Linda that just said, "Call me now." My hands shook so badly I could barely dial her number, and when she answered, I could hear something in her voice that I could not quite identify, some combination of relief and satisfaction that made my heart pound so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. She told me Judge Thornton had issued her decision and that I needed to sit down, and I went into the back storage room and closed the door and pressed my back against a shelf full of coffee beans while Linda read me the highlights of a 23-page ruling that would change everything. Judge Thornton had found that Horizon Digital Solutions was a marital asset subject to equitable distribution, and that based on the preponderance of evidence, I had contributed approximately 85% of the value creation in the business through my labor, creativity, and strategic direction, while Ryan had contributed approximately 15%. She ordered that I be awarded full ownership of the company along with all associated assets, including client contracts, intellectual property, and business accounts. And she further ordered Ryan to pay me $200,000 in compensatory damages for his systematic diversion of marital funds and his deliberate undervaluation of my contributions during settlement negotiations. Linda said it was one of the most thorough and unambiguous rulings she had seen in her 20 years practicing family law, and that Judge Thornton had essentially eviscerated every argument Derek Stapleton had made in a way that left no room for appeal. I could not speak for a long moment because something in my throat had closed up, and tears were streaming down my face in a way that felt like years of pressure finally releasing. And when I finally found words, all I could say was, "Thank you," over and over until Linda told me to stop thanking her, because I had won this case with my own documentation and testimony and refusal to accept their lies. She said the official paperwork would be filed within 48 hours and that Ryan had 30 days to transfer all business assets and pay the damages, and she warned me that he would probably be difficult about compliance, but we had the full force of the court behind us now, and she would make sure he followed through on every word of the judgment. After we hung up, I sat in that storage room surrounded by coffee supplies and cleaning products, and I let myself feel everything I had been holding back for months. The rage and grief and vindication all mixed together into something that felt almost like rebirth. My manager knocked on the door asking if I was okay because I had been gone for 20 minutes, and I told her I had just gotten some very good news and I needed to take the rest of the day off, and she looked at my tear-streaked face and told me to go and not worry about anything. I drove to Cary Park on Queen Anne Hill because I needed to see something bigger than myself, and I stood looking out at the Seattle skyline with the Space Needle rising up through the mist and Mount Rainier hidden somewhere behind the clouds, and I felt like I was seeing the city for the first time, as a place where I actually belonged. Other tourists were taking selfies, and couples were holding hands, And I was just a 25-year-old woman standing in the rain with mascara probably running down her face, but I felt more powerful in that moment than I had ever felt in my entire life. I called my parents and told them about the ruling, and my father said he was proud of me for not giving up even though they had advised me to take the settlement. And my mother cried and said she was sorry for not believing in me sooner. I called Rachel and she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear, and she said she was driving up from Portland that weekend to take me out for the most expensive dinner we could find because this called for celebration. I thought about calling Ryan just to hear his voice when he realized he had lost everything, but Linda had warned me against any direct contact that might give Derek grounds to claim harassment. So instead, I just stood in the rain, letting the water wash over me like some kind of baptism into a new life. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and logistics, as Linda worked with a business attorney to facilitate the transfer of Horizon Digital Solutions into my sole ownership. Ryan fought everything predictably, claiming the ruling was unjust and that he planned to appeal, but his own attorney apparently told him an appeal would be expensive and futile given the strength of Judge Thornton's findings. So he eventually capitulated with the kind of bitterness that made every interaction feel toxic. I had to go to the office to collect files and equipment, and I found it half empty because Ryan had apparently fired most of the staff in a fit of rage after the ruling came down, which meant I had to start rebuilding the team from scratch. Jessica had quit or been fired depending on whose version you believed, and I heard through former colleagues that she and Ryan had broken up shortly after the trial because apparently his financial situation was not as appealing once he lost access to my business. I felt a grim satisfaction in that news even though I knew it was petty. But after everything they had put me through, I figured I was entitled to a little schadenfreude. I renamed the company Horizon Strategies and rebranded everything to reflect a fresh start, bringing back 2 of the junior marketers who had been laid off and hiring 3 new team members with skills in areas where we needed to grow. I reached out personally to every client explaining the ownership transition and reassuring them that the quality of work they had come to expect would continue unchanged. And to my relief, most of them responded positively because they had always worked primarily with me anyway. I landed 2 new major clients in the first month, including a regional hospital network called Pacific Cascade Medical Center that wanted to overhaul their patient communication strategy, and a boutique hotel chain called Emerald Coast Resorts that needed help with their digital presence across 5 locations in Washington and Oregon. The work was challenging but energizing in a way it had not been for years because I was finally building something that was mine alone, something that no one could take credit for or steal or diminish with their lies. The money from Ryan came in installments because he claimed he needed time to liquidate assets, which Linda said was probably true since he had been living beyond his means and had burned through most of his accessible cash, trying to maintain the lifestyle he thought would impress Jessica. Each payment felt like a small victory, tangible proof that the system had recognized what he had done to me and was forcing him to make restitution. I used part of the damages to pay off my legal fees and put the rest into a savings account because I had learned the hard way that financial security was not something you could take for granted. I moved out of the apartment where I had lived with Ryan and found a small townhouse in Ballard with exposed brick and big windows that let in the light, and I furnished it slowly with pieces I chose myself without having to consider anyone else's preferences. I hung art on the walls that I actually liked and bought plants that I tended carefully and created a space that felt like mine in a way nothing had felt mine for a very long time. About 3 months after the trial, I was having coffee at a place called Stoneway Cafe when I ran into Sandra Martinez, the yoga studio owner who had testified on my behalf, and she hugged me like we were old friends and asked how I was doing. I told her about the ruling and the rebranding and the new clients, and she said she had always known I would land on my feet because women like us do not stay down for long. She mentioned she was expanding Mindful Movement to Tacoma and needed help with the marketing for the new location. And right there, over lattes and almond croissants, we sketched out a plan for her launch campaign that got her so excited she insisted on paying for breakfast. As I walked back to my car afterward, I realized that this was what success actually felt like. Not the hollow validation of building something with someone who did not value you, but the solid satisfaction of creating real value on your own terms and being recognized for it by people who understood quality work when they saw it. I started having lunch regularly with Linda at a Vietnamese restaurant near her office called Saigon Pearl, and she became not just my attorney, but a mentor and friend who understood what I had been through, because she had seen it play out in courtrooms 100 times before. She told me about other cases she had handled where women had been systematically erased from their own achievements by husbands or business partners who exploited trust and love to commit financial abuse, And she said the reason she practiced family law, despite how emotionally draining it could be, was because sometimes the system actually worked, and women like me got justice. She encouraged me to think about sharing my story publicly once enough time had passed, to write about what I had experienced and what I had learned, because there were countless other women out there going through similar situations who needed to know they were not alone and that fighting back was possible. I was not sure I was ready for that level of exposure, but I told her I would think about it because maybe turning my pain into something that could help others was the final step in reclaiming my narrative. If you have made it this far in this journey with me, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories of courage and redemption, and hit that bell icon so you are notified when new content goes live, and leave a comment saying something like "Resilience reveals everything," because your engagement truly helps spread these important messages to people who need hope. By summer, I had grown Horizon strategies to the point where we needed a bigger office space, and I found a beautiful converted warehouse in Georgetown with high ceilings and natural light that made everyone who walked in feel inspired. I hired a full-time office manager and brought on 2 more strategists and started developing specialized service packages for different industry verticals based on what I had learned about client needs over the years. Revenue was up 40% over where it had been under the old company structure, and I realized that Ryan's involvement had actually been holding us back because his ego required us to pursue certain types of clients and projects that were not good strategic fits. Without him, I could focus purely on doing excellent work for clients who valued that work, and the business thrived in ways it never had when he was taking credit for my labor. I invested in professional development for my team, sending them to conferences and paying for online courses, and I created a culture where people's contributions were recognized and rewarded rather than exploited and stolen. Several of my employees told me it was the best job they had ever had, and I felt proud knowing I was building something that created value not just for clients, but for the people who worked with me. I started a foundation later that year called the Second Chapter Project, focused on providing resources and support for women rebuilding their lives after divorce or financial abuse. I partnered with legal aid organizations and career counselors and financial advisors to offer workshops and one-on-one consulting for women who could not afford traditional services, and I donated a percentage of Horizon Strategies' profits to fund the program. The first workshop we held at a community center in Ballard drew 30 women, and listening to their stories, I heard echoes of my own experience repeated with different details, but the same fundamental pattern of trust exploited and contributions erased. I told them about my journey through the court system and showed them that justice was possible even when it seemed impossible, and several women came up to me afterward with tears in their eyes saying they had been ready to give up, but now felt like maybe they could fight. That feeling of turning my worst experience into something that could genuinely help others was more satisfying than any business success I had achieved, because it meant Ryan had not just taken from me, he had inadvertently created the catalyst for something larger than both of us. I saw Ryan one last time about a year after the trial at a networking event downtown that we both apparently still attended, and he looked older somehow, worn down by whatever consequences his choices had brought. He tried to approach me with what might have been an attempt at reconciliation or explanation, but I just looked at him calmly and walked away because I had nothing left to say to him, and his words held no power over me anymore. Jessica was not with him, and I heard later they had split acrimoniously after she discovered he had been lying to her too about his finances and business prospects. And while I took no pleasure in anyone's suffering, I also felt no obligation to feel sorry for either of them. They had made their choices, and those choices had consequences. And I had made mine and built a life that was richer and more authentic than anything I had experienced during my marriage. On the anniversary of the day the ruling came down, I took myself to dinner at Canlis, the same expensive restaurant where Ryan had taken Jessica during our divorce, and I sat alone at a table overlooking Lake Union, eating the best meal I had ever had, and drinking wine that cost more than I used to make in a week at the coffee shop. I toasted myself quietly for surviving and fighting and refusing to accept the story other people tried to write about my life, and I thought about the girl I had been at 23 meeting Ryan at that networking event, and how desperately I wished I could go back and warn her about what was coming. But then I realized that if I could go back, I probably would not change anything because that pain and betrayal had forged me into someone stronger and wiser, and more certain of my own worth than I ever could have become without being tested. The view from that restaurant window showed the city lights reflecting off dark water, and I understood finally that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you are actually made of, and that the fortune the judge revealed that day in court was not just the $6.7 million or the business ownership, but the truth about who I had always been underneath the person I pretended to be for someone who never deserved me.